Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere strange, soft, and just a little absurd. Deep into the twilight gardens of the Ottoman palaces where trees don't just grow fruit, they grow chairs, tables, and once even a chaise lounge that looked like it was waiting for a very patient sultan to recline. You stroll in barefoot because why not? And the ground under you is a mosaic of crushed rose petals and worn flagstones, still warm from the day. The smell is a layered perfume. Ripe figs dripping sweetness onto the soil, orange blossoms drifting in from somewhere just out of sight, and a faint herbal musk from the clipped lavender hedges. Overhead, the sky is a thick indigo with the first star peeking out like it's shy. You take a deep breath and think, if these trees can be trained into armchairs, maybe I could be trained into sleeping better. And then you remember, probably not. You probably wouldn't survive the decades of bending, grafting, and trimming they put these poor trees through. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening somewhere far from Istanbul, tell me in the comments where you are and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push through a carved wooden gate inlaid with mother of pearl. Inside, the courtyards feel like a maze designed by someone with a fondness for tricking visitors. Every turn opens onto a new view. Columns reflected in still pools, marble benches hidden in vine-covered alcoves, and at least one peacock that seems personally offended by your presence. Beyond them, rows of fruit trees arch over gravel paths. But these aren't the tidy, upright orchard trees you might expect. No, these have trunks that lean and curl, branches woven together like slow-growing wickerwork. Some even have flat wooden surfaces supported by living limbs, a fusion of horticulture and carpentry. The Ottoman gardeners, called bahçıvan, learned early that a tree's shape could be persuaded with patience, water, and just enough sunlight. Historians still argue whether this practice began purely for beauty or out of necessity. Some suggest it started when gardeners ran out of space and decided to make their orchard trees double as seating. Whatever the origin, the skill became an art form by the 16th century, right around the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, whose name sounds like he should have been a stage magician but was, in fact, a serious patron of the sciences, arts, and eccentric botany. You pause to run your fingers along the smooth curve of a pear tree's armrest. It feels warm, alive, and faintly sticky where sap has seeped from an old graft. The gardener watching you is silent, his beard dusted with pollen, but he smiles faintly as if you've passed some unspoken test. You imagine him working in slow rhythms, morning pruning, afternoon watering, evening inspection, every day for decades. This is not fast work. One quirky tidbit. Ottoman gardeners sometimes trained young saplings to grow in the exact footprint of palace courtyard furniture. They would plant a tree where the back leg of a chair should be, then another where the front leg would go, binding the two together with strips of soaked leather until, years later, they had one living, unified frame. The cushions? Those came from elsewhere, thankfully. A warm breeze stirs the leaves overhead, and you hear the dull thunk of a fig falling into the grass nearby. The palace cats know this sound well. Some of them prefer fruit to fish, a dietary choice you weren't expecting. As you continue walking, you notice that every corner of this place feels deliberate. The placement of fountains ensures the sound of trickling water is never too far away. The tall cypress trees are lined up to catch the prevailing winds, making sure the scent of ripening peaches drifts exactly where the Sultan's shaded terrace sits. It's easy to romanticize this garden as a paradise, but it was also a place of work. Intense, physical work. Gardeners climbed ladders to reach high branches, tied and untied supports, replaced splints on growing wood, and monitored for pests with the vigilance of centuries. Somewhere nearby, you catch a whiff of the terry smoke they use to deter insects. Thick, almost medicinal. The smell makes you think of old libraries and campfires as if the trees themselves were inhaling stories. You wander further in, passing a bench that looks suspiciously like a mulberry tree with an identity crisis. Its seat is polished from years of use, but the backrest still carries the rough bark texture of living wood. The fruit dangles overhead, heavy and purple-black. You pluck one and taste it. It's so sweet it makes your teeth ache a little. You wonder if eating while sitting in the same tree feels rude, but the branches don't seem to mind. The palace lights begin to glow faintly behind latticed windows, casting gold nets across the paths. Somewhere a nightingale starts its liquid song. The air cools slightly, carrying the scent of mint from a nearby herb patch. You slow your steps, letting the sounds and smells fold around you. In the distance, you see the faint silhouette of a gardener adjusting a rope, looping it just so around a young quince tree. You realize you're watching the beginning of another piece of living furniture, one that will take decades to finish. You can't help but think about time differently here. The gardeners know they will never sit in the chairs they start. They plant and shape for future sultans, future guests, future dreamers who will walk through at twilight and marvel at their work. It's a kind of patience that feels impossible in the modern world, where we can order a chair online and have it at our door tomorrow. Here, the waiting is the point. The slowness is the art. Somewhere, you feel a strange sense of envy, not for the luxury, but for the rhythm of it. A life measured in seasons instead of hours. In the faint hum of the evening, you almost imagine yourself bending gently, growing steadily, being coaxed into some strange but beautiful form. The path narrows until the gravel crunch gives way to a soft carpet of moss. Your toes sink slightly into its cool, damp surface, and you hear the faint squeak of a watering can handle turning. Ahead, 3 gardeners stand around a young sapling, their movements unhurried but purposeful. They aren't just watering, they're performing a kind of careful surgery. One of them, a wiry man with hands like polished walnut, leans in and presses the blade of a small, curved knife against the sapling's bark. The cut is deliberate, a shallow, crescent-shaped slice. You instinctively wince, but the tree doesn't flinch. It simply stands there, letting the gardener peel back the thin layer of skin to reveal the pale green cambium beneath. From a basket, another gardener lifts a slender branch freshly cut from a different tree. Same species, slightly different variety. The cut at its end is almost identical in shape. With steady fingers, they marry the 2 cuts together, the living tissue pressed so closely that it looks like they've always belonged. You're watching grafting, one of the oldest and slowest horticultural arts, and in the Ottoman world, it's elevated to something close to a ritual. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans inherited these techniques from ancient Persian gardeners or whether they developed their own unique refinements within the palace walls. Either way, the process requires skill, patience, and if the gardener you're watching is anything to judge by, a monk-like focus. A strip of damp cloth is wrapped around the joint, snug but not choking. This will hold the branch in place while the tree heals, merging the foreign limb into its own body. In a few weeks, the cloth will be loosened, then removed entirely, leaving just a faint scar where the 2 once met. Eventually, that scar will disappear into the flow of bark, and no one will know the branch didn't grow there on its own. One quirky tidbit. Some Ottoman gardeners would graft multiple varieties of the same fruit onto a single tree, 3 types of cherries on one trunk, for example. They called these hospitality trees because a guest could stand in one spot and sample an entire orchard's worth of flavors without moving a step. You can almost picture a slightly smug gardener standing by, watching a court visitor's face light up in disbelief. The man with the knife glances at you briefly, as if deciding whether you're worth explaining things to. He doesn't speak, but his eyes tell you that in this garden, the act of grafting isn't just about making a plant grow, it's about bending time. By adding a branch that's already a year or 2 old to a younger tree, they're accelerating nature's schedule. The furniture they're building might still take decades, but every graft is a little push forward, a quiet defiance of the slow crawl of seasons. You follow them to a different corner, where a small fig tree has been guided into what looks suspiciously like the frame of a low stool. The gardeners point to a place where 2 thin trunks, planted inches apart, have been twisted together like a rope. A strip of soft leather holds them in place, but the wood itself has already begun to fuse. The gardener traces his finger along the seam, and you can feel how the living tissue is knitting together under the bark. The light is fading now, and the moss underfoot glows faintly with trapped moisture. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the hollow knock of wooden mallets. Someone's driving posts into the ground to brace a newly bent sapling. This sound, you realize, is the pulse of the garden's work. Small impacts, patient adjustments, countless repetitions over years. You reach out to touch a young quince tree being trained into the curve of what will one day be the arm of a chair. Its wood is still pliable, the green bark smooth under your fingers. The gardener warns you softly, not because you might hurt the tree, but because too much handling could disturb its memory. Yes, apparently trees have a kind of structural memory. If bent and braced long enough, the wood will eventually remember its new shape, even after the supports are gone. You can't help but laugh at the idea of a tree with a memory, as if it could reminisce about its wild youth before being coaxed into furniture duty. But the gardener just nods seriously. He's not joking. In his world, wood remembers better than people do. In the fading light, you watch as another apprentice kneels to adjust the supports around a walnut sapling. The supports are simple. Bamboo stakes and twine, angled just so to persuade the trunk to grow diagonally rather than straight up. Every week the twine will be loosened and shifted slightly, letting the tree grow without cutting into its bark. The effect is so gradual that if you came here every day, you might swear nothing was changing at all, until one day the shape was simply different, as if the tree had decided overnight to comply. From a nearby bench, you see a small pile of tools. Knives with blades like bird beaks, tiny saws, shears with jaws polished from years of use. None of them look sharp in the dangerous way, but you suspect they could slice through a finger if handled carelessly. The smell of fresh-cut wood hangs in the air, a little sweet, a little green, like cucumbers and dust mixed together. The gardeners pack away their tools as the call to evening prayer echoes over the palace walls, soft and melodic. They move without rushing, each gesture the kind of smooth that comes from thousands of repetitions. You linger a little longer, watching the last of the light gather on the grafted joints, those little points where one life has been stitched into another. And as the shadows deepen, you can't help thinking, maybe the most remarkable thing here isn't the chairs or the tables that will eventually emerge. It's that every single piece began with a careful human hand on living wood, asking it, gently but firmly, to grow in a new direction. You follow the mossy path until it widens again, the stones returning underfoot in a faint mosaic pattern. Ahead, a low wall of pale marble opens into a courtyard, and the air changes. Warmer, thicker with the scent of peaches. You step through and realize you've wandered into the fruit quarter of the palace gardens, a place where flavor is status and the trees wear their ripeness like jewels. Here, the branches hang heavy. Peaches the color of flushed cheeks sway just within reach, their fuzz catching the last light. Pears dangle in neat pairs as if posing for a painter. Above you, cherries shine like drops of lacquered red glass. In the Ottoman court, these weren't just snacks. They were symbols. Serving a guest a plate of rare fruit was like putting down a gilded invitation that whispered, "You matter here." The rarer the variety, the higher the unspoken compliment. Historians still argue whether the empire's obsession with exotic fruits was rooted more in culinary delight or political theater. Some suggest it was a quiet form of diplomacy. A visiting dignitary might taste a peach bread only for the sultan's table, and understand, without words, the reach and refinement of Ottoman cultivation. After all, a fruit that only grows here is a fruit that reminds you of who holds the soil. One quirky tidbit? There are accounts, half believed, half laughed at, of a variety of cherry so delicate it had to be harvested at dawn and served before noon. Otherwise, it would collapse into a puddle of fragrant mush. The court called it the morning jewel. Whether it was real or just a bit of imperial bragging, no one knows. But the idea fits here, in a garden where the line between reality and spectacle is as thin as a peach's skin. You pause under an apricot tree trained into the vague outline of a high-backed chair. Its fruit hangs in clusters just above where your head would rest, each one glowing softly in the evening light. Imagine sitting here during a summer feast, plucking dessert from your own headrest while musicians play in the distance. It's both decadent and faintly ridiculous. Two moods the Ottoman court was not afraid to mix. A gardener strolls past carrying a shallow wooden tray of figs so dark they look like drops of night sky. He tips his head toward a cluster of palace servants setting a long, low table under a canopy of intertwined grapevines. You realize that the grapes themselves act as both decoration and shade. In a few minutes, the table will be laden with plates of sliced melon, bowls of cherries, and sherbets scented with rosewater. Guests will recline on cushions, reaching lazily overhead for more fruit as the evening cools. As you wander deeper into the courtyard, you notice that not all the fruit trees are shaped into furniture. Some grow in elegant spirals or gentle arches, framing pathways and fountains. The effect is a kind of edible architecture. You walk through a doorway made of living apple branches, then past a wall where espaliered pear trees have been trained flat against stone, their fruit lined up like ornaments. It's all deliberate, down to the angle at which the sun hits each variety. You stop at a small fountain shaped like a pomegranate, its carved stone segments spilling water into a shallow basin. The symbolism isn't lost on you. In Ottoman art, the pomegranate stood for abundance, unity, and sometimes, depending on the poet, the Sultan's many loyal subjects. It was also a practical crop, tough-skinned enough to travel but spectacular when cracked open at the table. You can imagine the theatrical moment, the host slicing one open so the ruby seeds spill like a cascade of tiny garnets. Somewhere nearby, a cluster of musicians begins to play a slow tune on ney flutes, the sound winding through the warm air like smoke. It blends with the hum of conversation and the occasional splash from the fountain. The whole space feels choreographed, not just for beauty, but for effect. If you were a visiting ambassador, you'd leave with the taste of perfect fruit on your tongue and the knowledge that your host could produce such perfection on demand. That's a kind of power, too. But not every fruit here is meant for show. In a corner half hidden by climbing roses, you find a squat, gnarled fig tree whose branches twist like an old man's fingers. Its fruit is small and not particularly pretty, but the gardener tending it treats it with reverence. When you raise an eyebrow, he explains that this tree's variety produces a fig so sweet it's used in palace medicine. Mixed with honey and herbs, it becomes a tonic for coughs and fatigue. Even the less photogenic trees have their role in this living economy. You pluck a peach from a nearby branch. It's warm from the day, its skin almost too tender to hold. The juice runs down your fingers as you bite into it, and for a moment, you understand why the sultans would invest decades in cultivating perfection. This isn't just fruit. It's a statement, a performance, a reminder that beauty and taste can be shaped with enough time and patience. As the light deepens, the colors shift, gold turning to amber, red to burgundy. The fruit seems to glow from within, like lanterns strung through the branches. You slow your steps, letting the evening settle around you. Somewhere in the shadows, you can see the faint silhouette of another piece of living furniture being coaxed into shape, its young branches tied gently with cloth. You make a mental note to find it again before you leave. The next bend in the path takes you into a quieter stretch of the gardens. The laughter and music from the fruit courtyard fade into a muffled background hum, replaced by the steady creak of rope and the occasional rustle of leaves under strain. Here, the work is less about sweetness and color and more about geometry. You've stepped into the training ground, where trunks, branches, and saplings are persuaded into curves, arches, and shapes no tree would choose for itself. In the half-light, you see the first example. A young walnut tree whose main trunk leans into a slow, sweeping S shape, like a frozen ribbon of wood. The base is anchored in a low, square planter, and halfway up the bend is a crosspiece, a simple plank of wood lashed in place. You realize you're looking at the beginnings of a chair's backrest. The gardener tending it, a stout man with forearms like braided rope, runs a hand over the joint as if checking the work of a sculptor. This shaping process, called espalier, when done flat against walls, has no single name here when done in 3 dimensions. It's part craft, part gamble. A branch might resist the curve, snapping under pressure instead of yielding. A sudden frost could kill a shape years in the making. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans learned their free-form shaping techniques from earlier Chinese experiments in penjing tree art, or developed them independently from the practical habit of bending trees for shade. Either way, by the 17th century, Ottoman gardeners were renowned for turning living trees into usable objects without killing them, a feat still rare today. You stop to watch 2 apprentices working together on a quince sapling. One kneels, holding the trunk steady, while the other slowly tightens a rope looped over a curved wooden brace. The sound is barely audible, a tiny, fibrous groan from inside the wood. The brace holds the trunk at an angle, encouraging it to grow not toward the sun but into a spiral. It will stay there for months, maybe years, being adjusted a fraction at a time. One quirky tidbit: to avoid leaving permanent scars, Ottoman gardeners sometimes use soaked silk ribbons instead of rope, believing the fabric's softness would prevent the bark from being damaged. Some say the sultans demanded the leftover silk be washed and reused for turbans or cushion covers. Waste was frowned upon, even in luxury. You trail your fingers along a row of wooden stakes planted in a zigzag. Between them, thin plum saplings are woven like basket reeds, crossing and recrossing until they resemble a lattice fence. In another decade, that lattice will be solid wood, strong enough to hold the weight of a tabletop. The table itself will bear fruit from the branches that sprout above, making dining both a meal and a harvest. The air here smells sharper: cut wood, damp soil, and the faint tang of pine resin from pitch-sealed cuts. Somewhere overhead, a dove coos lazily, unbothered by the strange shapes below. The light has cooled into blue-gray shadows, and every curve and knot seems more pronounced. You find yourself seeing the trees less as plants and more as slow-moving sculptures. Further along, you encounter something stranger still: a cherry tree with a perfectly circular opening in the middle of its trunk, large enough for a child to crawl through. The edges of the hole are smooth, framed by living bark. A gardener nearby notices your curiosity and explains. This was started when the tree was barely thicker than a cane. Two trunks were planted side by side, bent toward each other, and fused at the base and the top, leaving the center open. It took over a decade to grow into a perfect ring. Not for furniture, he says, just for beauty and children's games. You step through a grove where several trees have been shaped into tall, arched forms, like the skeletons of giant tents. Walking between them, you feel as if you're in a living cathedral. The branches overhead have been trained to interlace, forming a roof of green leaves. It's quiet inside, cooler too. The sultans might have strolled here during summer heat, the shade dense enough to trick the body into thinking it was evening. Off to the side, you notice an unfinished piece. What looks like the early frame of a bench, still awkward and angular. The branches are braced with sticks and bound with strips of cloth. Some leaves droop, showing signs of stress. It's a reminder that not every project succeeds. The gardener nearby shrugs. Sometimes a branch refuses to bend, or a trunk splits unexpectedly. The living wood has its own will, and while it can be coaxed, it can never be entirely controlled. You reach out to steady yourself against one of the brace posts and feel its rough texture, splinters catching slightly on your skin. The post itself is temporary, but it bears the marks of seasons. Sun bleached on one side, moss creeping up from the base. Even the tools of the trade seem to age here in place. In the distance, you hear a faint pop, the sound of a rope knot loosening under strain. One of the apprentices curses softly under his breath, then glances at you with an apologetic smile. They'll have to redo that tie tomorrow. You realize this garden is a constant negotiation. Growth versus restraint. Nature's pace versus human impatience. And somewhere in that tension, beauty emerges. Slowly, stubbornly, and always on its own terms. The deeper you go, the more the garden seems to change its mood. The neat, sunny spaces give way to shaded corridors, their paths edged with clipped boxwood that hides the ground beneath in green secrecy. Here, the air feels heavier, as if you've stepped into the backstage of a grand performance. You can hear low voices ahead, steady, murmured, and almost conspiratorial. You round a corner and see them. 5 gardeners gathered under the skeletal frame of what will one day be a living pavilion. Their heads are close together, and their hands move in small, deliberate gestures as they examine a bundle of grafting knives and pruning shears laid out on a silk cloth. The oldest among them, his beard white as almond blossoms, glances up when you arrive. His eyes weigh you, not unkindly, but with the quiet calculation of someone deciding how much you should be allowed to know. The Ottomans employed hundreds of gardeners, but there were whispers of smaller, closed circles among them. Groups entrusted with the rarest seeds, the most unusual grafting methods, and the stranger experiments that the palace didn't want broadcast beyond its walls. Historians still argue whether these groups were formal guilds or simply friendships hardened into tradition, but records mention the keepers of the green secrets as early as the 1500s. One quirky tidbit: Some palace gossip claimed these gardeners had a ritual of planting a shadow tree in an undisclosed location for every major living furniture piece they built. The idea was that if a drought, pest, or political upheaval destroyed the original, the secret copy could one day replace it. No one knows how many of these shadow trees ever survived or where they were planted, though modern botanists have found oddly shaped ancient trees in rural Turkey that could be descendants. The old gardener gestures for you to come closer. Without a word, he hands you a small sprig of something. Its leaves shaped like teardrops, its stem surprisingly warm from his palm. He indicates a clay pot beside him, freshly filled with soil, and nods. It's an invitation. You kneel, pressing the sprig into the earth, and he covers it with just enough soil to hold it steady. Then he ties a thin cord from the sapling to a wooden stake. Not tight, just a whisper of restraint. It feels symbolic, like you've been initiated into something you don't fully understand. In the middle of their meeting, one of the younger men produces a folded piece of parchment. It's covered in looping calligraphy and small sketches of chairs, tables, and arches, each design annotated with instructions on where to bend, when to prune, how to bind. The parchment is creased and thumb-worn, but the ink is dark, and the lines are confident. The designs are ambitious. A low divan shaded by the arms of a fig tree, a dining table whose legs are 4 braided cherry trunks, even what looks like a gazebo grown entirely from walnut branches. The old man taps one of the sketches and speaks softly, pointing to a particular bend in the trunk. You can't catch every word, but his tone makes it clear. This curve is the heart of the design. Get it wrong, and the whole piece fails. The others nod, their eyes following his finger like students absorbing a final lesson. It strikes you that what they're doing here isn't just gardening, it's choreography for living things. Every rope, stake, and cut is a step in a long, slow dance, and these gardeners are its only true dancers. To the outside world, the finished pieces will seem magical, effortless. But here, under the filtered light, you see the years of practice, the calculated risks, the whispered strategies that keep the magic alive. A gust of wind stirs the silk cloth holding the tools, and one of the knives flashes briefly in the fading light. The youngest gardener quickly folds the cloth over the tools, tucking it away into a cedar box. The box itself is carved with vine motifs, and you notice it has a small brass lock. Apparently, even tools can be considered too valuable or too dangerous to leave lying around. Before you go, the old gardener presses something into your hand, a peach pit, still moist from its fruit. He closes your fingers over it, his palm rough against yours. For shade, he says simply. Whether he means literal shade or something else, you can't tell. As you walk away, the murmurs resume behind you, blending into the rustle of leaves and the faint creak of bending wood. You don't look back, not because you're forbidden, but because you understand that in this garden, some mysteries are more beautiful when left intact. You leave the shaded quarter behind and emerge into a smaller, sunlit terrace. The sudden brightness feels almost theatrical, and you realize why. This space is built for an audience of one. The cushions on the low marble bench are plump. The view is perfectly framed by tall cypress trees, and in the center stands the most bizarre tree you've seen yet. A pear tree grown into the exact shape of a divan, complete with curved armrests and a reclining back. The branches above form a leafy canopy, dappling the ground with shifting patches of gold. A servant in a loose embroidered tunic kneels near the base, plucking a ripe pear and placing it on a silver tray. He doesn't eat it himself. He sets it carefully on the bench, next to a bowl of sherbet and a folded napkin. It's not hard to imagine the Sultan strolling out, settling into this living couch and plucking dessert directly from the furniture. In this garden, utility and extravagance share the same branch. Historians still argue whether these strange hybrids were actually the Sultan's own commissions or the results of gardeners trying to outdo each other for his favor. There are records of rulers making eccentric demands, like the time one reportedly asked for a peach tree to be shaped into a writing desk so he could pen letters under its shade. But whether those stories are exaggerated court gossip or truth, no one can be certain. One quirky tidbit? There's a half-credible account from a Venetian envoy who swore he saw a pomegranate tree grown into a cage shape, with songbirds living inside it. The trunk and branches formed the bars, and the fruit hung like lanterns between them. Whether it was practical for the birds is questionable, but it certainly impressed the envoy enough to write about it in his report back home. You wander around the divan-shaped pear tree, noticing the subtle mechanics that make it possible. Thin brass rods, almost invisible against the bark, support the armrest from beneath. The curves of the wood are natural but guided. They've been coaxed to grow into gentle arcs with careful trimming keeping them from getting too thick too soon. The result looks effortless, but you know it represents decades of patient shaping. Farther along the terrace, you find another curiosity. A low, round table made from 4 braided cherry trunks. The braids are so tight they look carved rather than grown, and the tabletop is actually a wide, flat ring of living wood, its surface covered in soft moss. Small white flowers peek between the braids, releasing a faint, honey scent that blends with the sharper tang of ripe cherries overhead. You imagine this table during a summer banquet, piled with dishes, the guests lounging nearby with juice-stained fingers. The terrace has other pieces too. An arched love seat made from intertwined quince trees, a stool that's clearly still in progress, and a canopy supported by apple trunks with branches trained to form a roof. Each piece is positioned for maximum effect, so that from the Sultan's seat, the entire arrangement appears harmonious, even symmetrical. You can almost see the moment. The Sultan waving a hand lazily, servants rushing to bring cushions, musicians striking up a tune, and guests marveling at the idea of furniture that's still alive. A gardener appears with a copper watering can, the metal glinting in the sunlight. He waters the base of the pear divan with a slow, deliberate pour, careful not to splash the trunk. You notice that the soil around each piece of living furniture is perfectly level and free of weeds. No accidental growth here. Everything is curated, maintained, and quietly rehearsed for the ruler's possible arrival. And yet, not everything is as polished as it looks from the Sultan's vantage point. Behind the terrace, you glimpse a narrow work area hidden by a wall of jasmine. Here, bent saplings are held in awkward braces, young branches are lashed to stakes, and fresh grafts are still wrapped in cloth. The beauty you see above is fed by the labor in this hidden backstage. It's a reminder that while the Sultan may have the vision, the gardeners do the years-long work of making it real. You linger a while longer, letting the image of the pear divan fix itself in your mind. The late sunlight turns the leaves translucent, their veins glowing like fine lace. The breeze stirs them, making the armrests shift ever so slightly, as if the tree is breathing. And maybe it is. The terrace path narrows, slipping between 2 high hedges before opening onto a quieter part of the palace grounds. Here, the trees stand in straighter rows, and the shapes they take are less about personal luxury and more about political theater. This is the diplomatic orchard, a place where the empire's guests were sometimes invited. Not just a stroll, but to leave carrying something far rarer than a bowl of figs. A living gift. You stop beneath an almond tree whose trunk twists into a gentle spiral, almost like a staircase carved from pale ivory. At its base, a clay pot cradles the root system, not planted directly in the ground, but free to be lifted, transported, and replanted elsewhere. These portable wonders were cultivated over years to be ready for such moments. A visiting ambassador might find himself escorted here, encouraged to choose a sapling shaped into a low stool, or a tall, narrow chair, its branches heavy with fruit. It was a gift unlike any jewel or gold coin, alive, growing, and marked with the gardener's signature style. The meaning was as layered as the wood itself. To gift a living piece of furniture was to offer time, years of careful tending, now placed into another ruler's care. It was also a subtle power move. Each gifted tree carried Ottoman techniques, soil, and heritage into foreign courts, reminding recipients of the empire's skill long after the initial ceremony was over. The fruit, too, spoke in symbols. Peaches for prosperity, pomegranates for fertility and unity, quinces for wisdom. Choosing the wrong fruit for the wrong guest could send unintended messages. One recorded exchange between the Ottomans and a Persian court tells of a young mulberry tree, its branches trained into the frame of a writing desk. When the gift arrived, the Persian ruler reportedly kept it in his study, using it as a place to draft poetry. Years later, he sent a letter back to the Sultan, describing how the desk still bloomed each spring, scattering petals across his manuscripts. Whether the story is embroidered with sentiment or not, it captured the essence of the diplomatic orchard. To bind two courts together through something both practical and poetic. You pause beside a quince tree grown into the shape of a low, three-legged stool. Its fruits are just starting to turn yellow, the skin still faintly green. A gardener nearby is working on a younger sapling, bending its trunk over a wooden jig that forces it into a perfect arc. The work is patient, precise, and strangely intimate. The tree resists at first, its fibers tense, but over time it will learn to hold the curve without support. Moving deeper into the orchard, you notice a section marked with painted wooden signs. The script is Ottoman Turkish, flowing and elaborate, but the drawings beside the letters make their purpose clear. A chair, a table, a shelf. These are the categories of trees in training, sorted by their intended final form. Some are just beginning, their shapes barely visible. Others are nearly complete, their wood strong enough to support the weight of a man. It's here you overhear two gardeners speaking in low tones. One mentions a planned gift for a Venetian envoy, a fig tree shaped into a tall, narrow cabinet with drawers made from woven vines. The other worries aloud about the weather, about whether the fruit will ripen in time for the ceremony. Their concerns are not about politics, but about growth cycles, pests, and water. The diplomacy of the orchard rests entirely on the success of the soil. At the far end of the row, a wooden pergola draped in grapevines leads you to a secluded fountain. The stone basin is carved with curling leaves and stylized fruit, echoing the very trees around you. The water is cool and clear, and you find yourself thinking that if these gifts were truly meant to charm foreign rulers, they likely succeeded, not just because of their novelty, but because of the serene world they came from. Who could refuse a piece of this calm? A faint breeze carries the smell of ripe plums. Somewhere, a bird calls from deep within the canopy. You realize that the diplomatic orchard is both stage and workshop, a place where politics, art, and horticulture meet in slow motion. The trees here are not rushed, and perhaps that is the point, to remind anyone who receives them that patience is its own form of power. You notice rows of saplings in clay pots, each one marked with a wooden tag carved with looping script. These are not yet shaped into chairs or stools. They are raw material in the earliest stages of their transformation. A man in a loose linen shirt is bent over one of the young trees. His knife is small, its blade thin and sharp, perfect for slipping under bark. You watch as he makes a delicate incision, almost like a surgeon. With practiced hands, he slides a sliver of another branch into the cut and binds it with strips of soft, damp cloth. This is grafting, the joining of two plants so they grow as one. The grafted branch is from a fruiting variety, and if the union takes, this chair-to-be will one day bear sweet plums. You are struck by the pace of it all. Each graft is a gamble. Some will thrive, others will wither before the next season. The gardener works silently, moving down the line, repeating the same ritual with infinite patience. You imagine him returning in a week to check the bindings, in a month to see the first signs of healing, in a year to shape the growing wood toward its destined form. Not all the work here is purely physical. Some trees are coaxed into growth patterns using substances the gardeners mix themselves. Infusions of willow bark to encourage rooting, solutions of ash to adjust soil acidity, powders from ground-up horn to strengthen the wood. These are the plant hormones and tonics of the Ottoman garden, brewed in ceramic jars and kept in the shade. There is a quiet science beneath the art. One gardener, noticing your interest, explains that certain trees respond better to shaping when their sap runs slow, so they begin their bends in autumn or winter. Others, like fig or olive, bend best when young, their fibers still supple. A misjudged season can ruin years of work, and so the gardeners keep calendars marked not by human holidays, but by the swelling of buds and the length of shadows. In a shaded alcove, you find a row of training frames, wooden structures built to guide a trunk or branch into the perfect arc or spiral. Some are as simple as a single stake. Others are elaborate lattices, clearly designed for complex shapes. You run your fingers over one and realize it's been used many times. Its surface is smooth from decades of contact with living wood. Beyond the alcove, a small garden bed is crowded with cuttings, each no taller than your knee. They are tended by a boy no older than 12, who sprinkles water from a clay jug with surprising care. You ask him what they will become, and he grins shyly. "Stools for the Sultan," he says before hurrying back to his work. You realize this craft is not just a skill, but an inheritance, passed down through generations of apprentices, each learning the patience to see a tree's potential years before it is realized. The deeper you walk, the more you sense the intimacy of this space. Here, in the heart of the garden, the work is less about spectacle and more about understanding the slow conversation between human intention and plant will. Each bend, each graft, each feeding is part of a negotiation. The gardener proposes a form. The tree either accepts or quietly refuses, growing its own way. A breeze lifts the scent of damp earth and crushed leaves. Somewhere in the rows, a cluster of apricot trees catches the late light, their young branches already beginning to curve in unison. You find yourself slowing your pace, as if by moving gently you might not disturb their growth. The science here is quiet, almost invisible, yet it shapes the gardens more profoundly than any grand display. As you leave this section, you glance back one last time. The rows of saplings stand like a patient army, each destined to become something both useful and beautiful. It occurs to you that the gardeners are not just shaping wood, they are shaping time itself, turning years into objects that can be touched, sat upon, and admired long after their makers are gone. The path widens again, leading you out of the quiet workshop gardens and toward the sound of voices. At first it is only a low hum, like bees around a hive, but as you draw nearer you realize it is the chatter of a crowd. You step through a pair of tall wooden gates and find yourself in a wide courtyard lined with flowering quince and almond trees. The air smells of sugar, wood smoke, and ripe fruit. Today is one of the seasonal festivals of fruit and form, a celebration held when the first pieces of living furniture are ready to be unveiled. The Sultan himself is absent. You're told he prefers to inspect new designs in private, but the rest of the court has turned out in fine silks and embroidered vests, joined by merchants, scholars, and even curious travelers like yourself. In the center of the courtyard stands a long wooden platform, its surface covered in carpet so the guests can walk comfortably. Upon it, under a canopy of woven reeds, sit the festival's wonders: chairs whose arms blossom with roses, a bench whose back curves from the trunk of a cherry tree, a writing desk whose legs are 4 carefully grown mulberry branches, each still bearing glossy leaves. A court herald calls out the name of each piece and the gardener responsible for it. The crowd applauds politely for the simpler shapes, straight-backed chairs and low tables, but gasps when a particularly ambitious creation appears. A cradle grown entirely from a single olive tree, its sides curved into protective arcs, tiny green fruits dangling above the space where a baby might sleep. Children dart between the adults, clutching paper cones filled with candied apricots or pomegranate seeds dusted with sugar. You notice stalls around the courtyard selling pastries shaped like miniature chairs and stools, delicate almond sweets dusted in powdered sugar. Even the food seems to mimic the artistry of the gardens. The gardeners themselves stand a little apart from the main throng, watching their creations with quiet pride. Some of them smile when a court lady leans close to admire the grain of a curved armrest. Others only nod, their expressions unreadable, as if the work is never truly finished, even once it leaves their hands. Musicians sit in the shade, plucking the strings of ouds and timbres, their melodies slow and warm, echoing the rhythm of growth itself. Between the music and the low conversation, the atmosphere is gentle, unhurried. This is not a place for rushing. The festival is less a competition than a reminder of the patience and craft required to coax beauty from living wood. As the day warms, the scent of fruit becomes more pronounced. Some of the pieces, those grown from peach or plum, still bear ripe offerings, and guests are invited to pick and taste them. You try a small golden apricot from the arm of a bench. It is warm from the sun and astonishingly sweet, as if the tree had concentrated all its care into this single gift. There is a ceremonial moment when a white-robed official pours water from a silver jug onto the roots of a young sapling planted at the edge of the courtyard. This, you're told, is the festival's tradition. Each year a new tree is begun, its shape planned to commemorate the season's finest creation. In 20 or 30 years, it will stand as a living archive of today's celebration. As the afternoon light softens, the crowd thins. Merchants pack away their stalls, children are called home, and the musicians play one last gentle tune. The gardeners begin to move the living furniture back into shaded alcoves, where it will be protected from the evening chill. You linger a moment longer, watching the shadows of the shaped trees stretch across the courtyard tiles. It occurs to you that this festival is not merely a display of skill. It is a shared pause in time, a way for the entire community to witness the slow magic that is always unfolding, mostly unseen, behind the garden walls. The path leaving the courtyard is narrower, paved with uneven stones that have been worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. You follow it toward a small arched gateway, above which hangs a carved wooden sign, a simple emblem of a fig leaf and a scimitar. This, a passing servant tells you, is the Gate of Merchants, the entrance used by traders who supply the palace gardens. Beyond the gate, the air shifts. The sweetness of flowering quince fades, replaced by the mingled scents of leather, spices, and dust from the road. Before you stretches a broad market square alive with movement, mules bearing heavy sacks, porters balancing bundles of tools, and hawkers calling out the virtues of their wares. Here, in the heart of the Ottoman capital's trading quarter, you see the hidden lifelines of the palace gardens. Grafting knives from Damascus, their blades narrow and curved for precision. Bundles of hemp twine from Anatolia, soaked in beeswax so they will not rot. Earthen jars of plant resin, imported from the Black Sea coast, used to seal cuts in living wood. Seed merchants display their treasures in shallow wooden trays. Pale kernels of almond, smooth stones of apricot, tiny black dots of basil and mint. Some seeds are common, destined for kitchen gardens. Others are exotic and costly, the glossy brown pits of rare dates brought from North Africa. Strange pale bulbs wrapped in straw, their origins whispered rather than announced. One elderly trader beckons you to his stall, drawing back a cloth to reveal a roll of parchment covered in careful ink drawings. It is a grafting guide, passed down from gardener to gardener, showing the slow transformation of sapling into stool, branch into armrest. The margins are filled with notes in multiple languages, Arabic, Greek, Armenian, proof that this knowledge has crossed many borders before finding its way here. The merchant's goods have traveled even farther. You overhear a conversation between two traders. One has just returned from Venice with a shipment of fine copper shears. The other speaks of a caravan bound for the Persian plateau, where rare mulberry cuttings will be exchanged for dyed silks. Some deals are made in the open, sealed with handshakes and a cup of coffee brewed thick and black. Others happen in the quiet corners of back rooms where certain seeds or saplings are too valuable or too dangerous to be shown in public. You catch sight of one such exchange, a small wooden crate handed over in near silence, its slats packed with damp moss to keep whatever grows inside alive. As the afternoon deepens, the market takes on a golden hue. Sunlight filters through awnings of dyed fabric, red, indigo, saffron, casting colored shadows across the ground. Children weave between the stalls, carrying messages or fetching water for the traders. A street musician plays a slow tune on a ney flute, the notes curling lazily through the warm air. You realize standing here that the palace gardens are not an isolated wonder. They are the end point of a vast and delicate web, stretching across mountains, deserts, and seas. Every chair grown from a living pear tree, every rose-covered bench, is the product of hundreds of unseen hands. The farmer who tended the parent tree, the sailor who guarded the seed on a storm-tossed voyage, the smith who forged the knife used to shape it. With a small pouch of dried figs purchased from a smiling vendor, you turn back toward the palace. The road winds uphill, the sound of the market fading behind you, replaced once more by the quiet rustle of leaves. Ahead, the gate looms again, its carved fig leaf now glowing softly in the late light. The afternoon light slants low across the palace grounds as you re-enter through the Gate of Merchants. The gardens are calm now, only the occasional flutter of a bird's wing or the whisper of a fountain disturbs the air. You wander toward a quieter corner where the gardener's experiments are tucked away from the paths meant for visitors and dignitaries. Here, in this secluded patch, the beauty of living furniture shows its more fragile side. Not every design thrives, and not every tree bends to the will of human hands. You pass a pear tree meant to form the shape of a low reading bench, its backrest nearly complete. Yet one branch droops heavy with ripening fruit, having snapped clean from the trunk under its own weight. The break is wrapped hastily in strips of linen, the sap glistening like amber along the wound. Nearby, a half-finished table stands awkwardly in the grass. Its 4 legs are uneven, one twisted slightly inward after a sudden frost stunted its growth. You can picture the moment when the gardeners realize this error, their months of planning suddenly undone by a single cold night. Some mishaps are quieter, almost invisible unless you know where to look. A stool grown from a cherry tree appears perfect at first glance, its seat a ring of smooth, living wood, but the inner bark hides a fungus that will eventually hollow it from within. The gardeners have marked it discreetly with a ribbon, a silent sign to their fellows that this piece is beautiful but doomed. And then there are the more dramatic accidents. You hear a story from a young apprentice who still seems half embarrassed to tell it. During last year's apricot harvest, an ambitious fruit arch collapsed mid-season. The structure, 2 intertwined saplings grown to curve over a path, had been laden with so much fruit that the tension in its bending trunk gave way. The collapse startled the palace cat, sent a basket of apricots tumbling into the ornamental pond, and forced the gardeners to work well into the night to clear the mess before the Sultan's morning stroll. Still, even failure has its uses here. The gardeners collect the broken limbs, the imperfect bends, and the rejected saplings. Some are carved into spoons or inlaid boxes. Others are burned in winter braziers, releasing a faint perfume of fruitwood smoke. To them, each mishap is a lesson in the patience and humility demanded by living art. In a shaded alcove, you find a series of stumps, their tops carved smooth and varnished. A senior gardener explains that these were once promising experiments. An armchair grown from an orange tree, a desk from a mulberry, but disease or storm ended them early. Now they serve as quiet memorials, reminders that nature's cooperation can never be taken for granted. As you walk away, the fading sunlight filters through a canopy of fig leaves, and you realize that the imperfections, broken branches, twisted legs, uneven seats, are as much a part of this place's history as the triumphs. In the gardens, as in life, not everything grows according to plan, and beauty often comes with the memory of what might have been. You slip past a half-latched gate tucked behind an overgrown hedge, and the air changes. The manicured scent of rosewater and citrus fades, replaced by a heavier, sweeter note, ripe fruit left to hang longer than any merchant would dare. This is the forbidden orchard, or so the apprentices whisper when they think no one is listening. Here, the gardeners experiment without the oversight of the court. They test the limits of their craft, both in shaping wood and in coaxing fruit to do things nature never intended. Rows of pomegranate trees bend into low arches, their trunks fused so tightly you can't tell where one ends and the next begins. Beneath them, vines creep up from the soil, weaving into the branches like patient green lace. Some of the trees here are grown in deliberately strange shapes, not for furniture but for curiosity's sake. A fig tree twists into a perfect spiral, each leaf placed as though in a painter's composition. A quince tree has been shaped into a cage, its bars alive and blooming, trapping within it a single stone bench worn smooth by time. Historians still argue whether these shapes served a practical purpose, shade, privacy, or even symbolic messages, or whether they were simply the gardener's playful defiance of conventional form. The fruit here is different. Some pears are the size of melons, swelling like overinflated balloons. A cluster of grapes dangles low, each orb translucent, light catching the tiny seeds like flecks of gold. A gardener in a dark blue sash tends to them with the focus of a jeweler cutting gems. You overhear him muttering about season bending, keeping a tree in bloom far beyond its natural cycle. He mentions grafting a winter flowering branch into a summer fruiting tree, an idea that sounds like horticultural alchemy. The result, he says, can yield 2 harvests from one living piece of furniture. In a shadowed corner, you spot a structure that makes you pause. At first you think it's another chair, but then you realize it's a cradle, grown entirely from an almond tree. The curve of its base sways gently in the breeze, the wood smooth and pale. The cradle is empty, and you wonder if it was ever meant to hold anything but the gardener's imagination. The orchard has rules, unspoken but firm. No outsider is allowed here without invitation, and nothing grown here is displayed in the Sultan's public gardens. Yet, traces of its creations sometimes slip out. A strangely shaped fruit at the market, or a rumor about a chair whose armrest blossoms in winter. You leave by the same gate, the scent of overripe pomegranate clinging faintly to your clothes, feeling as though you've stepped out of a dream and back into the polite order of the palace grounds. The day begins with a quiet buzz in the outer gardens, messengers darting between the carpenter's yard, the stone masons, and the gardener's pavilion. You can tell something is afoot because even the oldest gardeners are smoothing their robes and combing their beards. Then, in the late morning heat, the news ripples through like the shimmer on the Bosporus. The Sultan has commissioned a living throne. Not a chair, not a bench, a throne. And it must be ready for the spring festival, a mere 3 seasons away. You can almost hear the collective gulp from the gardeners. The head gardener, a wiry man with a voice like worn leather, gathers his best apprentices under the largest plane tree in the courtyard. He sketches the concept in the dirt with a stick. A wide, high-backed seat, arms curving like the horns of a ram, and a canopy of living leaves overhead to shade the Sultan's head. The kicker? Every part of it must be alive. Rooted, growing, flowering, and fruiting. No nails, no ropes, no dead wood. Historians still argue whether this project was born of the Sultan's love of innovation, or of his fondness for setting impossible challenges. One fringe account claims he once commissioned a couch made of trained lions, but the palace never confirmed that, and you suspect the chronicler had been into the pomegranate wine. The gardeners choose mulberry as the primary material, flexible enough to bend, strong enough to support weight. They begin by planting the trees in a tight crescent, weaving their trunks together as they grow. Every day, the apprentices gently adjust the saplings' positions, sometimes shifting them no more than the width of a fingernail. Wooden braces hold key curves in place, and cloth wraps prevent the bark from scarring. Then comes the embellishment. Grapevines for trailing ornament along the armrests, small citrus for bursts of scent near the headrest, and a crown of flowering almond branches at the very top. The almond blooms will appear just in time for the spring festival, creating the illusion of a halo around the Sultan's head. It's painstaking work. One apprentice is assigned solely to brushing away insects with a fan made of swan feathers. Another monitors soil moisture like a nervous physician checking a patient's pulse. At night, lanterns are hung to prevent frost, their glow making the throne in progress look like a shrine to some green deity. There's a rumor that the carpenters are jealous. After all, they've built every throne in the palace for generations. One even mutters that a tree can't be sanded smooth enough for royal skin. The gardeners ignore him, but you notice they start polishing the bark with fine river stones until it shines as if lacquered. The final weeks are tense. A late frost threatens the almond blossoms, and one armrest develops a crack where the wood dried too quickly. But the gardeners improvise. They graft a healthy branch over the flaw, training it to curve perfectly into place. When the day arrives, the Sultan walks into the garden, flanked by advisors, guards, and curious courtiers. He circles the living throne once, twice, then sits. The wood creaks softly but holds. Overhead, the almond flowers tremble in the breeze, releasing a faint perfume. The Sultan smiles, a rare, small smile that sets the apprentices exhaling in unison. For the rest of the festival, the throne remains outdoors, drawing gasps from guests. And though no one says it aloud, you can tell the gardeners are already imagining what they might attempt next, if only the Sultan dares to ask. In the quieter corners of the palace archive, where dust lies thick on scrolls and the air smells faintly of cedar oil, you find records of commissions unlike any other. These were not for the Sultan's festivals, nor for the pleasure gardens of the living. They were for the afterlife. In Ottoman belief, as in many older traditions, the soul's journey beyond death was imagined as a continuation of earthly life, albeit perfected. Comfort, beauty, and dignity were not abandoned at the grave. They were prepared for it. For the most powerful, that meant being surrounded by the same elegance they enjoyed in life. right down to their furniture. Thus arose the curious craft of Maser mobiliae, grave furniture. Pieces shaped from living trees, intended to be placed near or even over a burial site so that, with time, they became inseparable from the earth. Some served as memorial benches for mourners, their roots firmly gripping the soil above the deceased. Others were elaborate, throne-like structures trained to arch protectively over a tomb. One particularly famous example is recorded in the 17th century gardener's ledger of Uskudar. It describes a mulberry mourning seat, grown over 25 years for a beloved court poet. The trunk split into two sweeping arms, forming a seat from which visitors could read verses aloud to the resting soul. The poet's own lines were carved into small copper plaques, then nailed, not into the tree itself, but onto braided ribbons of silk that draped its branches. In spring, white mulberry blossoms mingled with the sound of recited poetry, creating a living, fragrant memorial. There was also a superstition at play. Certain tree shapes were believed to shield the spirit from evil winds or wandering jinn. A circular canopy, fully closed overhead, symbolized divine protection. A twisted trunk, when placed at the head of the grave, was thought to confuse malevolent spirits, keeping them from finding the body. Such projects required immense patience. A living memorial could take decades to reach its final form, and more than one was left unfinished when a patron died unexpectedly. In these cases, the gardeners faced a choice: abandon the work or finish it as an anonymous gift to the public cemetery. Many chose the latter, believing that good deeds in this life might ease their own journey in the next. You imagine walking through one of those old cemeteries, the air heavy with pine resin, sunlight falling in dappled patterns through the curved limbs of these tree-grown seats, the stone markers half hidden beneath their shade. No one alive remembers the names on many of the graves, yet the trees remain, shaped by loving, deliberate hands long gone. It's a different sort of immortality, not of the person, nor even the tree itself, but of the gesture. By the mid-19th century, the Ottoman Empire was changing faster than its gardens could keep up. Railways cut through old orchards. European-style furniture, polished mahogany armoires, cast-iron beds, was imported by steamship and flaunted in palaces that once prized only the living, breathing kind. The art of tree training for practical furniture began to seem quaint, even a little backward, in the eyes of the modernizing elite. Court gardeners, once the quiet engineers of leafy marvels, found themselves reassigned to tending rose beds for foreign dignitaries or maintaining topiary to impress European guests. Historians still argue whether the decline was due more to changing tastes or to the sheer impracticality of waiting decades for a single chair to grow. Either way, the tradition began to shrink like a neglected sapling, yet it didn't vanish. In smaller towns and rural estates far from the bustle of Istanbul, families quietly kept the craft alive. Without imperial budgets or elaborate palatial grounds, their creations were humbler. Plum trees coaxed into low garden benches, willow branches woven into shade arches for summer weddings. These pieces didn't boast the grandeur of palace commissions, but they carried the same DNA of patience and intimacy. One Ottoman diary from the 1880s describes a modest village wedding, where the bride and groom sat beneath a living love seat, grown from two intertwined apricot trees. The couple's grandparents had begun training it before either child was born. Guests rested their hands on its smooth, sun-warmed arms as they offered blessings. No imported chair could match that weight of time. Even under stricter urban planning in the late Empire and early Republic, there were whispered networks of gardeners who passed on their shaping techniques like smuggled treasure. Apprentices learned to spot the pliable months of each species, to tie supports that would not scar the bark, and to read the slow body language of a growing trunk. By the 20th century, these living pieces became more a curiosity than a commodity. Travelers' journals mention strange wooden seats still alive in Anatolian gardens, and a few sepia photographs survive, faded proof that the tradition hadn't been completely uprooted. Today, a few dedicated horticultural artists in Turkey and beyond are reviving the practice, often without realizing they are retracing Ottoman steps. They bend young branches into flowing, functional forms. They wait years for the wood to harden into permanence. Some even quote old proverbs like Ach Yashiken Eiler. The tree bends while it is young, half as horticultural advice, half as life philosophy. And so the craft lingers, stubborn as a root beneath a cracked stone path. You picture it surviving in pockets, a lone cherry-shaped table in a family garden, a curved-arm bench hidden in the corner of a municipal park, a mulberry canopy arching over a quiet grave. Each one a conversation between human patience and the slow, deliberate work of nature. You lean back in your mind, feeling the cool of living wood against your skin, the leaves whispering overhead. The empire may be gone, the palace is quieter, but somewhere, a gardener is tying a branch to a frame, smiling at a chair that will not be finished in their lifetime.